be a progressive video. I'm gonna have this is going to be a part one, just structuring the directories, just setting it up for a single deployment, instead of deploying two links for the front end and the API. So hopefully everything is going to go as planned. So I trust myself. So VS Code just updated, so I'm going to just switch to the terminal, the VS Code terminals, and I'll start by creating the React application. So my React application, I'm going to create it using Vite. So I'll use Vite because Vite is quite fast when it comes to creating a build, right? So I'm going to use npm create Vite. My internet is quite fast. I believe I should be able to deploy fast. So I'll create the client. So I'll say ds client, ds for digital shop. So I'll just create ds client. I'm gonna pick React, and I'm just going to do JavaScript, not TypeScript. And I'll cd into ds client, and I'll do npm install. So while the packages are being installed, the node packages are being installed, I'm gonna switch to another terminal here and get into pip and shell, or even make a directory here for the server. So mkdir and then ds server. So I'll cd into ds server right now. So let me cd into ds server and do a pip and shell. And I'm using pip to manage my Python virtual environment. Get it to create a virtual environment and start working in the virtual environment in the ds folder. So because my API is going to be built on top of we'll be using Flask Python framework, so I need to do a pip install. I'm using pip and to manage the packages. So I'll install Flask. I'm going to install Flask RESTful, because I'm building a RESTful API, and then eventually we'll come up with a database. We'll create a database for that. So I forgot to include the install. So that is it. So we're doing the installation now. Confirm if the other side is still working. So my node packages have already finished installed, so my client is up and running. I'm having the client here. So the first thing I'll do is, because the main focus on this tutorial is how to structure your folders for single deployment. So for me to be able to work smoothly and to deploy this thing as once, I need to go to my Flask application, the Flask folder here, which is the server, and I'm going to create a folder here and call it static. So the static folder here is going to be, it will carry the build, so the React build. So the React build files will be in this particular folder. That is where the React build will reside. So for that to happen, I need to configure the Vite application. So I need to add some configuration here under Vite. So I'll open this folder. I'll open this file, vite.config. So I'll go to vite.config, and I'm gonna add inside the define config. I'm gonna add a configuration for build. Is it build? First, Let me just confirm. I believe it should be built, then build dist out dist. It's so out. So this is the output directory. So there's the build output directory. I will now specify that to be what I created here, the static file. Let me just zoom into this so that it can be visible enough. Yeah, so I'll set up my build directory to be the static file inside the server, right? So for me to access that path, I need to go back one step, / and then ds server, and then static. Right, so that's basically what I have configured. So I've said go back one directory inside the ds server directory, and inside the static directory make those build files go there, right? So let's test this. You can see there's nothing in the static directory here. So if I go to the terminal where I'm running the Vite application and I say npm run build, right? So basically building my React application. So if I run build, you can see here that the folder that it's building to is the static folder. Now if you expand the static folder, you see the build files have been copied there, right? So that is the first step. The first step is to configure, to create the both directories for the client where you're running the React application, and then the server directory where you'll be running the Flask application. And inside the Flask application folder, we create a folder called static, and then that static, then we go back to the Flask Vite configuration. We configure Vite and we say when you build the files, copy them into the static folder inside the server directory. Right? So once we run that build, we'll be able to see that, right? So let's put this into practice. So let's go back to the Flask application, right? We have not started developing or coding anything. We are just configuring the directories for a single deployment. So let's see what else we can do. Now we need to run our Flask application. So first of all, I'm gonna create an app folder, an app file, app.py, and inside app.py I will inside app.py I'm gonna import. So from Flask, import Flask, import Flask. Let me make sure that I've configured my interpreter. So I'm using, my application is digitize. Is it what I called? No, it's called DS server. Just give me 1 second. There's something that is trying to mess me up over here. Pause. All right, so let's go back to this. So I've selected the interpreter that I'm using, and then so I'll create my application. So app equals to Flask, and we'll use the name, and then we'll run it. So if name equals to main, just app.run. Then we are going to say the debugger to be true, and I'll configure a port to be, I'll use just 5003 as my server. So when I run this application, remember here I'm running two terminals. You have to be very specific which terminal you are on. So my first terminal here is where I'm running the Flask application built, and the other one is for the Python. So you have to be specific so that you make sure that you are always in the virtual environment. So I'm going to run here Python app.py, not .py. So this will just give me, it will just give me an empty, just give me a 404 because I've not configured any routes, right? So if I try to go to that link, if I try to access the link, I'm gonna close this so that my machine can be a bit faster. So if I go to the local host at port 5003, I'm gonna get a 44 because I've not configured any route. So I'm going to create a route. The first route here that I'm going to create is the route that will point to the root. Right? So I'm going to create a route path, and for that I need to use send file. I'm going to use send file because I want to send the index file that is inside the static. So def, and this is, let's say, I'm gonna just call it root. Right, I'm just gonna call that root, and in this root I'm just going to return. I'll also need to import OS so that I can get the exact path. So I'm gonna return send file. I'm also going to define another variable here. Let's call it base path, which is basically os dot path dot absolute path. Say the absolute path is os dot path dot dir name, and dir name here I'm gonna call that not file but is it dictionary. Let me try to see if I'm gonna get this correct. Let's just print the base path and see what I'm going to find. So if I print the base path, I'm getting an error. It's not defined, so I'll change this to file. And then I'm gonna run this and see. So this is what I'm looking for. So that becomes my base path. Then sending file here, I'll just still use os dot path dot join, and what I'm joining here is the base path, and I'm joining that with the static folder, static dot index. That's the file I'm sending. So that's what I'm configuring. So when you access the root path, the React root path, it's going to serve the index file that I built from the React application, right? So here the index file is going to be returned. Besides that, I still need to serve the JavaScript files, the CSS files that are going to be built from the React application. I need them to also be served from the server side, right? So I'm gonna create another route, but this time around the route is going to be the route path, but serve any any path that is being requested to be served from a directory. So I'll send from a directory. So sending from a directory, so I'll say sorry. So for this one now, I'm just going to call it static. So static, but the static will have a path. So this path is basically the JavaScript files, because if you look at this index files, when you open it, you will find out that it's pointing to some sources, right? So it's pointing to this source. For the JavaScript, it points to a particular source, and this source is assets.index. So whenever it's requesting for this particular path and you want it to be served from the server side, we need to tell Flask where to get whatever path is being requested by the client. Even for images, like let's say for example this icon, it's a white icon, right? Yeah, so even those images needs to be pointed to a particular path in the server side after you build. So that is what we are specifying with this particular route. So we are going to return send from directory. The directory we are sending from is path.join. Again, it is the base path and then the static. And so that's where we'll be serving. So if I save this and look at what I'm going to have, refresh on this, you'll be able to see that let me see so there's an error, and there seems to be an error. It says view function mapping is overwriting existing endpoint. Let's just put that is destroyed. So I seem to be overwriting the path. I hope this video doesn't take longer than I expected. So view function mapping, what am I? Yes. Let me not call this static, but rather let me just call it static. I just call it static files. Let's call it static files like that. Clear this, run it, and go back here, refresh in the browser. Now I am able to serve my Vite application from the server side. So it says missing one requirement. So I need to include here a second parameter called path, like that. So the path that is being requested for. So let me refresh this. And now I am serving my React application from the server side. Right? And you can see even the JavaScript has been loaded, right? So that's how you do that. You configure your React application, so whenever you do a build, it will immediately send the build file inside the static folder. And once you have these two paths over here, then that makes that available. So the other thing is, these are the server-side paths the server-side routes that I have created. So you might find out that you also need to have client-side routes, right? So for example, if I'm building this application to have specific links, like probably the home page and the about us page, and because this is going to be a shop, if I need a link for exploring, searching, and also maybe viewing a product and all those things, I'll need client-side routing, right? So let's see how we can do that. So if I go to my React application here, I'm just going to run it for now so that we can see it practically. So first of all, I want to make this clarification. For my changes to reflect in the server side, I need to run a build, right? But for now, I need to run the development part. I need to run the dev server, the development server, in my case for the client side, right? So the changes that I make now will not reflect in the server side. Basically, they will not reflect in my server, the server side, application or the port, the application running in the port 543. So we are assuming that my production link runs at port 503, right? This is where I'm kind of like deploying both the API and client side. Okay, but for me to just develop the client side alone before I deploy, I'll need to run a development server for my React application. So how do I do that? I just run npm start. Npm, let's just call it npm. Wait a minute, if I say start, I'm getting an error missing. All right, so we need to check the package JSON. Okay, we need to run dev, npm run dev. So now this starts the development server, right? And because I'm still developing, I need to create a proxy, right? So a proxy in case I need data from the API. But before we go to the proxy first, let's first of all look at the client-side routing. Right? So I'm running the development server here, and I also need to have a React router to create the client-side routes. So I'm going to do an npm install React router DOM, React router DOM. So let's give it a moment. So Vite is quite fast, and also the internet is quite fast. So we have that. So we can now run the development server, and I can now go here and create two components. So I'll create a folder called pages, and inside my pages, I'm gonna create the home component, home.jsx, and I'm gonna create another one and call it about.jsx. So those are my two components. So I can go to home and export default function, and I just call it home, and I'm gonna return this is home, right? And I'll do the same for the about us, and I'm gonna say this is about. Okay, so let's just have those two simple components. Let me create another component for the header, for the navigation, right? So I'll just create a folder, call it components, and inside components, I'm gonna create a component called navbar.jsx. So inside navbar, just Control V, nav, and I'm gonna create here, I'm gonna be returning a header component, and in the header component I'll create a link router link to, I'm just gonna put that to home like that, and then put their home, and then I'm gonna create another link, and this will go to the about right? So about, so we have those two links. Is there a problem? I don't think there is a problem, right? So continue, anyway, it will fix itself. So I'll go to the app.js, and inside app.js I'm just gonna remove everything inside the app component. Let me hide this for a second. So remove everything here and include my nav, and before I include my nav, I need to return the browser router, and I'll put uh, the routes. So I'll have routes, and these routes will be pointing to, so we have two routes. So create a route for self-closing path. So the path here is the default path, and the element here is the home element. The same thing with the about. Right. Okay, so we have those two, home and about. So remember, this does not reflect, again, it will not reflect in the server side, right? So right now we'll just be using for testing, we'll just be using the development server, which is basically localhost at 5173 at 5173 5173. There seems to be an error in the nav, but I don't know. This error is coming. Oh, we messed up something over here. So let me just put this inside of brackets. Brackets are usually, when you're returning a single component, I think you need to put that inside of brackets. Maybe let me run this a second time. Okay, so we are supposed to be seeing home. Look at the terminal, it says home is not defined, so we need to define, or rather to import home. We're importing home here in the app.jsx. Home needs to be imported. Right, so we have those two. Right, so we have the about us and the href. So if you can navigate, you'll be able to see those two. I don't know what do we have in the about. Yeah, so this needs to be about. So yeah, so this is about this form. I have not designed anything, so this is just a demo to also show that how do you map the client-side routes once you do this single deployment, right? Because what you're doing here is we are combining the React application, the built React application and the Flask application to be like a single app deployed on a single server, right? So we have, let's say for example, now we have managed to set up the React application and the clients and routes are already set up. Okay, so let's build this, right? So remember, inside the server side we are not able to see any changes yet, so we'll see changes here once we do the deployment or the build. So I'm gonna stop the dev server and do an npm run build. So if we do an npm run build, now it has updated the server side build, right? So this is now reflecting in the port 5003, the Flask application, right? And I'm now able even to navigate, right? But now the problem comes in if I go to the about link. If you look at the URL here, it's localhost at port 503 about, right? If I refresh that, I'm gonna get a 404. Why? Because this route is not defined in server side, right? We only defined the client side route, and because we have built the client and the files have been copied to the server side, we also need to replicate the client side routes to the server side. Now that might be a problem if you have multiple links, right? So how do you handle that? You go back to the server side in your app, in the same place that you had this particular link for the static files. We can add an if statement right here. And so we can say if let's say if the link does not exist, so if path.exists, and so which path are we looking for? If this particular path, here, the path that to the static file, right? So we'll include a path, right? So you can confirm which path we are looking for here, but we are saying if that path exists that you can return, right? You can return it from the directory. If it doesn't, right? If it doesn't exist, then just send the index file. Just send back the index file, right? So this takes care of, because right now Flask is trying to look if there is a file called about, right, in the static file, but it doesn't exist. So if it doesn't exist, it returns a 404. So we are checking if that particular path, in this case about, if it doesn't exist, then return the index.html. Now if we refresh, we'll be able to see that we have an error that says the static file did not return a valid response. Yeah, we need to do a return. To do a return there. So if I refresh, now you'll see it will still load the same React application, and it actually even loads the client side route. So now that takes care of that. In case we do to do a refresh, okay. Now one final configuration now is how now do you bring in the API part. Let's say for example, in my React application, so I'm going to switch to my React application here, run the development server. run dev. So the dev server, remember, runs at port 5173. So we are going to monitor changes from here. So let's say, for example, in my homepage, I'm building a digitized shop. So in my homepage, I want to list all the products that I am selling for the shop, right? So I need to go to my React application and do a fetch. Okay? So inside my home directory, I need to fetch my products from the database and display them, right? So in that case, I'll need to do a use effect, right? I'll need to do a use effect and include a callback function. And I'll be calling this endpoint once, right? So no dependencies. So inside here, I'm gonna do a fetch, and I'm doing a fetch to what? I want to get the products, right? But I want to get these products from the API, right? So I want to fetch the products, so API products. Now, if you look closely here, I did not include the host, right? I am only including the path, or just requesting the resource that I want. Okay, that's the only thing that I'm passing there. Okay, so let's do a then here dot then. We're gonna get a response, and we want this response in JSON. Right, so we want to return a JSON. Then we are going to consume the JSON. So this is the data. So I just want to console log the data for now, because I have not started building the UI. Am I still live? Just confirm. Still live streaming, or I'm still talking to myself. Just confirming using my phone. Moment. Just confirming using my phone. It should be audible. Yeah, I believe so. Still live. Right, so I'm just gonna console log the data. Right, so if you look at this, if I refresh, if I go to the home page, I'm getting of course valid JSON. Of course, now this is a 4.4. If we go to the network, let me just zoom in. If I go to the network, you'll see that I'm getting a 304, a 4.4. The response is actually some HTML. We're actually returning the React application. So we need to create a path of the products, right? So I'll go to the server, and inside the server here, inside the application, I need to create, let me actually create an API. So I'm gonna create a product, I'm gonna create a class, a folder here for controllers. So not outside, but inside the server, create a folder for controllers, and the controller that I want to create here is a product controller. So products.py, which is going to be resource. So Flask, import Flask RESTful. Oh, sorry, from Flask RESTful, import resource. Okay, so I'm gonna create a class for product, and it will be extending a resource. And then I'm gonna do a get, define get. So for the get, here, I will return some products. So let's say I have a bunch of products. So I'm just gonna create a catalog here, which is basically a list of products. So I'll have a name, and let's say this part product is, let's say I'm selling utensils, so no, I'm selling computers, so I'll say HP laptop, and I have probably a description. It's a Core i5, RAM is it has a RAM of 16 GB, and it has a SDR of 500 GBs, and probably we can have a Lenovo. So this is just dummy data. Of course, we'll be retrieving this from the database. So let's have a Lenovo Y7 with 32 GB of RAM, whatever, 500 GB. So let's just have that. Then we can probably return JSONify. I think we need to Flask. JSON from Flask, import JSONify. So we're just gonna JSONify catalog. It do self catalog. So let's just have that one single endpoint getting the product. Then we can go back to the app here. This time around, we'll create an API. So API, this API will be importing this from RESTful import API. Okay, so we create an API for our app, and then we can basically serve that API. So we can say API dot add resource, and the resource we are adding here is products. So we need to import from controllers. Import products, and then the products that we are importing here is what we are adding as a resource, and we include a path called API products. Okay, so API products is what we are serving as our resource. So let's see if that works. Again, we are still on the development server, so if we refresh this, we are still gonna get that error. So for this particular API to work in the development server, we need to create a proxy. So we'll go to the package.json here and add a proxy, right? And this one is just for the development. So we'll create a proxy. The proxy here will be HTTP localhost at port 5004. That is where we are going to proxy. That is just for the development bit. So once we do that, we need to refresh this to the development server, and we should be able to see some changes reflecting. Is it 5004 or what is it? I believe it should be 5004. So we'll just switch that to that. Proxy. So we need a proxy, and the proxy is that. So let me just confirm if the proxy is working. It should be working. We should module proxy. I need to confirm how to configure proxy. So I'll just say invite React proxy configuration. We set up a proxy configuration. Dependency express. Let's say package JSON. Let me just run and look for proxy. Server proxy. This is not necessary. I thought we could just configure that from the package.json. Proxy HTTP localhost 5005. Okay, that is not. Let's say React package.json. I've forgotten how to configure a proxy. Forgotten how to configure DB proxy API. Okay, let me go with the byte configuration here and configure this proxy. So I'm just gonna copy paste and go to the byte config and include the proxy server. And this is my Q. This is just for the development part. It's not gonna work once you deploy, but just for the development purposes, we are proxying anything that goes from has the API path to be sent to the 504 API. Okay. So let's test. Let's stop this and run it again. I'm gonna switch to this and run. My server is not running. I'm gonna run this the server as well. So let's run the server as well. Okay, I'm seeing there's something missing. Controller product has no attribute as view. Has no attribute as view, so I'm gonna add resource products from controller import products. We go to the products. Products here and just remove this. Remove this and just return this. Let's paste it here. Seeing as though be the problem. attribute module controllers has no attribute as view. Okay, as product. Expense resource. Add resource product. First of all, let's just use API alone. Try that products are not API. So some reason this is not working as I expected it to. Let's do products, import products. Right, so we've created these products, so we can say from controllers.products import products, and then we can add the resource here. We can add a resource to be products, and we can include here, products like that as our path, and then we can switch to the products We can switch to what? We can switch to products here, and of course return the products that we the product catalog. Okay, so we can return the product catalog like that. So I'm gonna run this application again. So let's see if the proxy server is working. So if I refresh this, not that, but rather this, if I refresh it, I'm now getting a 500 error, which basically means that we are getting to the server, only that we are getting a 500 error 500. So close this, try to figure out what that error 500 is all about. DB 304 304. So refresh again, 500 internal server error. So let's return something simple, as yeah, JSONify. Let's return something simple as an empty string. So something simple as that, and refresh. Still getting a 500. Okay, so let's look at restarting the server. So the error is loading, restarting with stats. Is the debugger on? And the debugger is restarting. Detected changes in restarting. So refresh. We are not hitting the path. Okay. What is the URL? API products. Let's confirm if we have that API products. Are we reaching that? Yeah, we are having that. So let's switch this to what we had before. So it's basically the proxy that is not working. I was hoping not to do a lot of debugging, but rather do a lot of demonstration. So I'm gonna cut this bit. So it means my proxy is not working. So let's remove that part as the target. Yes, so you can proxy everything to that and then include that. So Python app be running. You need to restart the white. Just start that as well. Still having the same. So configuring a proxy sometimes could be a painstaking process. So let me just try and do something. Let me just run the build. Forget about the proxy for now. Let me just build this particular app. So kill it, npm run build. So the build will work. So if now I refresh this, my home page, and look at the console, now I'm able to see the products. Okay, can now fetch the products successfully. So that's how we do that. I'm gonna stop the recording there, and I'll do a second part where we are going to deploy this application.